Okay, I'll try and keep this kind of short. This summer I have been in the process of refreshing my wardrobe with skirts and tops, and as I've been going along, I've been figuring out what works best, what patterns I need to refine, what details are worth including and aren't, and I'm ready to make some more pieces. So this time I'm going to keep them all within this nice green color palette so that they'll all match pretty well with each other, but I have checked and they will match pretty darn well with everything else in my wardrobe. The goal is to make 3 tops and 3 skirts this week. I'm not sure how far I'll get, but that's the plan. Alright, starting with the first top. If you remember a few videos back when I made my 3 linen skirts, at the end of the video I rated each one by predicting how often I thought I'd wear them. It turns out I was basically dead accurate. The pumpkin skirt I have worn quite often, but sparingly and in nicer situations, and I've only needed to wash it once so far. The olive green skirt I have worn anywhere and everywhere, and by the time I do laundry every single time, it is trashed. And then the plum skirt, which I rated as closet clutter, I have actually only worn about 2 times, and both of those only out of guilt that I hadn't been wearing it. So I really love the fabric and I love the color, especially with the greens, and I had been planning on buying more of it to make a top out of anyways. And I just thought, you know, why should I waste $20 more on fabric when I'm never really going to wear this plum skirt? So I decided to recycle it. Now for the pattern, I'm going to be picking up where I left off on that bodice video. I kind of evolved the pattern 4 different times, and now I'm going to be picking up with that 4th pattern and carrying on the evolution. This pattern is the top that I was just wearing in the introduction of this video, and it was nearly perfect. However, in the introduction of that video, I went into this whole spiel about how I was going to add like an elastic lace-up section in the back, and then I just didn't bother, which I don't regret because I really did need to crank those tops out and really just focus on the patterning itself and not the experimentation. And so I'm glad I did that, but now that I've got the pattern figured out, it's time to experiment with some size adjustability. So I'm going to be using most of the pattern as it is, it's just the center back piece that needs an adjustment. To do that, I'm going to be drawing a curved line from the waist up to the shoulder and then splitting it apart. It's a very simple alteration, but this way the pattern will have a lot of ease built in and it's all centered in the back so that it can get tightened up to whatever level I feel comfortable with, and the front should fit just the same. The construction on this is going to be extremely simple, basically identical to the bodices I made last time around, with the addition of the lacing loops at the side back seam. Okay, here we go. The plum bodice. I've tweaked the pattern just a tiny bit since I last used it for that coral bodice, and I think the front now looks perfect. The back was the interesting part though. So for one, The lace-up section is definitely wide. I wasn't really like thinking of that or taking that into consideration when I was patterning. So for next time, I would definitely want to like curve and reshape the back bodice pieces a little bit to just place the princess seam in closer together so that it's a little bit more narrow of a lace-up section. This little like peplum here, I kind of curved the pattern like down when I was making that back piece, and I wasn't really sure why I did that. I was afraid of it being too short, I think. And then I was afraid that it was going to be too long and look weird, but I actually like it. I think it looks a little bit like a baby 18th century jacket peplum, so I'll take it. Oh, and then the neckline, there's a little bit of an issue with it kind of gaping a bit. I think that I need to curve in the top of that pattern a little bit to make it fit a little bit smoother back there. I used elastic to lace it up instead of just a regular lacing cord, and that's not a bad idea, and I think that people should definitely like consider that if you want a little bit more flexibility in your garments. However, I had to buy the elastic online because I didn't want just basic white or black elastic, and so I feel like it was kind of an unnecessary cost factor. So I'm going to play around with that in the future, but it's an option. So yeah, I think I rate this one a solid 4 out of 5 stars. It's definitely not perfect, but it is 100% functional and definitely something that I'm going to get a lot of wear out of. Alright, for the next project, I'm going to be making the Carnation Skirt. The fabric for this is unfortunately a little bit irreplaceable. It is an incredibly lightweight, flowing, soft, just gorgeous 4-ounce cotton sateen. The design I made, referencing the print on an extant 18th century gown. However, I printed it using a company called myfabricdesigns.com, which was my favorite fabric printing company, and they unexpectedly went out of business. I bought several chunks of this cotton sateen last year when they started having random 50% off sales. I would have bought a lot more if I had realized the reason for all of those 50% off sales. I do have this design up in my Spoonflower shop, along with several other colorways. However, they don't really have a perfect match for this lightweight cotton sateen. But if you're interested, I'll put a link in the description box for where you can find it. So, as I mentioned, unfortunately I only have 2 yards of this fabric and I can't print any more, so for the skirt, I want to make the best possible use of the fabric, and I'm just imagining something super lightweight and full and flowing. I would have loved to do a wrap skirt, however I don't think that 2 yards is going to be enough, so I'm probably going to make some kind of skirt with a leg slit to kind of do a faux wrap skirt and then maybe a decorative bow on the side. We'll see what I can do. In order to make this skirt as full as possible, I used my 3/4 circle skirt pattern, which I made in this video, and you can follow that link in the description box as well if you want to learn how to make yourself a set of skirt patterns. I definitely don't have enough fabric to do a full circle skirt, but 3/4 with this flowing fabric will still give me a pretty full-looking skirt. To begin constructing this thing, I started with the side front and side back seams. For the left side front, I'm only going to be sewing it down about 1/3 of the way. The rest I'm going to be leaving open for a leg slit to kind of pretend that I made a wrap skirt. When sewing bias cut seams like these side front and side back panels, I find it works better in the sewing machine to work from the bottom of the skirt up to the waist of the skirt, just because I find that it stretches the fabric out less if I do that. Then I'm going to be serging these seams to finish them, and with the leg slit seam, I'm going to be serging each side of it individually, so that it presses open instead of to the side. Here you can see me double folding that raw edge on either side of the leg slit, and then here I'm sewing around the edges to finish it. So I'm still using the same Victorian-inspired pocket pattern that I've been using for a few years now. I've just simplified the insertion process a little bit, by first serging around the top edge and that curved edge, leaving unserged the edge that will be sewn into the skirt seam. Then I mark about 6 inches down from the raw edge of the waist, and pin the pocket in place on both the front and back skirt panels. Sew it down, iron it flat, and then line up the skirt front and back. On that skirt seam, I sew from the waistline down to the top of the pocket. Then I sew about 3.5 inches from the base of the pocket all the way down to the hem of the skirt. Now I'm going to be serging each edge of that skirt individually, and now I just have to sew around the pocket. You can see that I'm pinning a little bit of ribbon to the front corner of the pocket, and then pinning around the rest of the pocket. I folded the skirt seam back and then sewed around the pocket, reinforcing that corner with the tape, and now it's done. You can also see where I pinned the top edge of that tape to meet the skirt waistband. So that pocket was set into the right side of the skirt. Next, I need to go ahead and sew in the waistband. Later, I'll come back and do the left side of the skirt because it's going to have an invisible zipper closure. I started by serging the left side seams of the skirt front and back panels, and then I did a bit of stay stitching around the waistline of the skirt. Next, you can see that I took a 1-inch wide strip of fusible cotton interfacing, and I'm ironing that to the 3-inch wide strip of fabric for the waistband. Now the skirt has been pinned to the waistband and I can sew it down, keeping my stitches just outside that line of stay stitching. You can also see that I pre-clipped that top edge of the skirt. This is so that it sits a little bit more smooth. It's more important the more full your skirt is flared, like if you have a full circle skirt. I found that if I don't clip that, then it winds up uneven with the waistband, and it even sometimes creates like a tight band inside the waistband if I forget to clip it. Clipping it before I pinned it in just helped it to kind of sit a little bit flatter and smoother against the waistband, but it's not 100% necessary. So now you can see that I'm ironing everything up, ironing down a 1/4 inch from that waistband, and that's basically as far as I can take the waistband until I've gotten in the zipper. So I pinned that left side seam, leaving about an 8-inch gap at the top, and sewed the side together. For my zipper, I'll be using an invisible zipper from my stash. They're the easiest for me to put in. I've got a lot of practice with them. I apologize for the atrocious lighting whenever I use my modern machine. I've never been able to figure out how to get the casing open to remove the light bulb, and it's helpful when you're sewing, but it looks horrible on film. So after the first side of the zipper is sewn in, I'll pin in the second side, making sure that the seams are lined up as best as I can, and sew that. I clipped the excess off of the zipper and then finished that little edge with fray check, ironed everything open, nice and smooth, and now I'm up to the hem. When you are putting in curved hems like this, I find it much easier to kind of work from middles. So I'll pin wherever there's a straight edge and then kind of pin in between and keep dividing it down. That is the best way I've found to get the fabric sitting evenly. There will be gaps because it's a curved hem, but it's not too bad. Now I'm down to finishing off the waistband, so I'm folding it underneath and then hand stitching it with a slip stitch so that it's nice and smooth and I don't have to worry about visible top stitching on the waistband of this piece. And then there's one thing that I almost forgot. I took a few strips of my leftover fabric and I sewed them all into tubes and turned them right side out. And then when I ironed them, they looked like this. And I fashioned those into a big floppy bow and sewed it onto the front of the skirt. And when I was done, it looked like this. I'm super excited about this one. It was a very simple premise. I just wanted to use the fabric to the best of my ability. I only had 2 yards and I wanted maximum fullness and swishiness, and I think that I've got just that. I also really like the little leg slit. It's fun when I'm going around wearing it, but it's also kind of practical for the summer, a little bit of ventilation. I don't know. I'll use whatever excuse I need to. Yeah, like for once, I have literally no complaints to make. I really enjoy this skirt. It would have been nice if size adjustability was an option, but considering the restraints I had, I would have had to sacrifice some of the fullness in order to make it size adjustable, so I'm happy with it the way it is. Alright, now that I have my basic bodice pattern pretty much figured out, I finally felt confident enough to try some of the variations. For one of the variations, I wanted to make the style that has like a solid band around the rib cage and then the top gathers underneath the bust into the band. And then for the other, I was kind of inspired by this picture because it was really similar to my brown herringbone bodice, with the main difference being that the front bottom edge is cut down into a bit of a slope and then there's a ruffle going around the whole bottom, which means that it's still fitted, but it's basically not even a crop top anymore. So I figured that I'd try this variation out for people who aren't quite into the crop top look, but like the mismatchability of separate skirt and top sets. So, starting with the gathered top pattern, I traced out my basic bodice pattern and then measured underneath the bust for where exactly that seam needed to sit. Then I cut that amount off of the bottom of each of my pattern pieces. I combined the center front and side front, combined the center back and side back, and then added replacement seam allowance onto the top edge. So those pieces were pretty easy, but the top is a little bit weirder. I took what remained of the bodice pieces and I matched them up at the princess seam underneath the arm. I lined up those seams as far down as they would go before they started to split apart, and then just left them that way. Pinned them together, and then I filled in that gap with a bit of scrap paper. For the back, there's a lot less of a curve, but I don't want it to gather up. So instead what I did is I transferred that curve to the center back seam. I would rather just have a center back seam than have weird gathers underneath my shoulders, so I thought that that would be the best option. I added seam allowance onto the upper bodice pieces, and here's what we're looking at. Now you get to watch me sew an entire seam on this mock-up without noticing that my bobbin thread was out. There we go, that's better. The mock-up fit surprisingly well, like better than I was expecting considering how weird the pattern looked. It was a little bit tight all the way around, so I figured that I'd add some onto the side seams, and the neckline was a little bit higher than I'd been aiming for. So I made those adjustments to my mock-up, adding a little bit onto each of the 4 side seams, and trimming the neckline down by about 1/2 of an inch. For the fabric for this project, I'm going to be using an old pillowcase. Just FYI, I bought linen sheets from Target, and they were pretty darn expensive for sheets, the most I'd ever spent on sheets before, and they lasted less than 1.5 years before the fitted sheet just totally ripped apart. So that was not a very impressive display of quality. If I'm going to pay a lot of money for a bed sheet, I'd like them to last more than 1.5 years. But I now have 2 extra pillowcases, and they're in a perfect sage green fabric. At first I was looking to buy a linen fabric that kind of matched this color, and then I was like, wait a second. So today I'll be recycling this pillowcase. It's a little bit faded and stained and kind of thin, so it might not last very long, but this is a wearable prototype, not really something that I want to be that invested in anyways. For the ruffled bodice, I just added a little bit of a slope onto the bottom of the front pieces, and then I changed the neckline into a higher, more narrow V. And then for the back pieces, I actually shifted the entire seam over so that the side back piece is now bigger and the lace-up section in the middle will be a lot more narrow. I also fiddled a bit with the center back seam, kind of curving it in around the neck to avoid that gaping that I was having with the purple bodice. The fabric I'm using for this is a lightweight green cotton that I got on clearance from Hobby Lobby. I actually stocked up pretty well at Hobby Lobby this past winter when they had all of their fall colors on clearance. So anyways, for the sewing of this, I apologize. I've made a bunch of these bodices now, and I was getting bored, so I just decided to, let the ADD part of my brain have its way. So I sewed both bodices at the same time, switching back and forth as often as I felt like it. So I'm sorry if this one's a bit harder to follow, but the construction is pretty basic for both of them. I started with the gathered bodice by sewing together the side seams and the back seams of both the outer and the lining, and then it looked like this. Then I switched to the ruffled bodice and I also sewed together the side seams and the bust seams of the outer and the lining. Then I sewed around 2 pieces of fabric that will become a placket later on to hide underneath the buttons of the ruffled bodice. And I also sewed the end of a strip of fabric that was going to be the ruffle at the bottom edge. And then I sewed a 1-inch wide bias cut strip into a tube, which will be my loops. And here is all of that lined up together, ready to go. I added interfacing to the front edges of both bodices since they will both button up and needed a bit of reinforcement. And then I took the gathered bodice and I started pinning all the way around the neckline and the armpit. Here's what that looks like, and I can go ahead and sew around all of those places that I just pinned. And then I tried a new method for the shoulder attachment. It's always the most tricky part, and there's a lot of variations, each one having their pros and cons. But for this one, I turned the front strap right side out, and then I stuck it inside the back strap. And I lined those edges up together and then just sewed straight across it. And when I had clipped it and turned it right side out, it looked like this. Like, not even that bad, considering how easy it was. It does mean that the bulk is shifted to the back of the shoulder, but with a fabric like this, that's not really a problem. I might not choose this method if it was a much thicker fabric, though. Then switching back to the ruffled bodice, I took that tube and started cutting it into 2-inch segments for all of the loops. I sewed a gather stitch along the top edge of that ruffle, and then I top stitched around those edges I had just sewn on the gathered bodice. I'm also sewing around the arm's eye of the gathered bodice, and I'm pinning over the side seams and the back seams so that I can stitch in the ditch and keep the seams from ever flipping over and getting twisted up on the inside. Now I'm pinning the bottom edges together so that I can sew a gather stitch. Then I switched back to the ruffled bodice to sew the side back seams. And then on the left side of the ruffled bodice, I measured out placements for my loops and then pinned them into position. I also pinned loops onto the side back panels, and then I stay stitched everything into position. Back on the gathered bodice, I sewed that gather stitch along the entire bottom edge, and then back on this ruffled bodice, I sewed all of the side back seams. Now the ruffled bodice outer and lining are both prepared and ready to be sewn together, and I actually decided to do that exact same shoulder attachment technique that I just did on the gathered bodice. Speaking of which, the gathered bodice has now been gathered to the lower portion, and I stitched around it, keeping just inside that line of gathered stitching. The corner of this was stupid. Trying to do that peak was a very unnecessarily hard move. There are a lot of ways that I could have done that differently, but in the end it looked really good, so I would probably do it again, but I don't necessarily recommend it for beginners because it was fiddly as frick. Then I noticed a very unfortunate thing. I had changed the neckline of this ruffled bodice to come in a little bit closer as a higher V neckline. However, I forgot to change it on the back, so they did not line up at all, which meant that I had to go and change that neckline, kind of widening it and lowering it down so that it would fit with the back piece. Unfortunate. Now I'm pinning that ruffled bodice together along the neckline and arm's eyes, and here's what they're both up to right now. For the gathered bodice, I sewed the bottom edge of both the outer and linings together, and then for the ruffled bodice, I started sewing all the way around those edges. So now the gathered bodice is almost done. There's a few things that need finished. The inner edge of that waistband piece needs to be turned under and then pinned to the underbust seam, and I'm going to go ahead and pin all the way around that band and top stitch it all in one go. The ruffled bodice needs the ruffle attached. I gathered it up and pinned part of it down, and this ruffle is over 200% the fullness of the bottom edge of the bodice, and that was just obviously going to be way too much. So I took that off and ended up cutting it down. I was guesstimating, so I cut it down to 150% fullness, which you can judge at the end if you thought that was best. Then I went ahead and did the top stitching around the arm's eyes, and now I just have the bottom edge that needs to be closed up. And the way I did this is because the armholes have already been completely finished, I could actually turn the bodice wrong side out and just pin it closed along the bottom edge, leaving a few inch wide gap in the center back. I sewed across that bottom edge and then turned it right side out through that gap. And look, it's all in one piece. It's a bagged lining, but with the arm's eyes already finished. I pinned all the way around the outer edges, and then top stitched, and then stitched in the ditch down all of the vertical seams, and this one is down to buttons. For the gathered bodice, I realized that there was a little bit of an unevenness. The inner lining of that waist piece was a little bit too big in the back, and I was afraid that if I tried to sew it from the back side, it'd be uneven, and if I tried to sew it from the front side, it would be gappy in there. So I decided to go ahead and do a loose hand basting stitch down that underbust seam, and then on the right side, I top stitched all the way around it. I sewed on the buttons while watching some TV, and here they are. Okay, this is the gathered underbust seam bodice. I need to catch your name for that. This one is actually nearly perfect, which is kind of a pleasant surprise because I was going into this thinking it was a total prototype, very low expectations. One small thing, I feel like there was something slightly off with the pattern because this edge right here, the bottom edge was a little bit wider and I kind of like stretched the top edge to fit and it worked, but you can see it kind of has a bit of an odd bubble here. So I need to figure out what exactly was going on with the pattern right there. But other than that, like, it's pretty much about perfect. I do wish I had made it size adjustable. At the time, I was kind of like mentally struggling with this pattern. It was just kind of a lot of moving parts and I was afraid to change too much on it, so I just did it with a solid back. I might make another one at some point just because now that I know that it works, like, and it looks good, I like it. Okay, and then the second bodice. I have like all sorts of mixed feelings about this one. Alright, starting from the top down, the neckline is nothing like I had been originally planning. Somehow I managed to get the button loops just slightly too tight. I think because the buttons I used last time for the herringbone bodice, they were about the same size, but they were like flat, and these have a little bit of thickness to them. So it's kind of a pain in the butt to button up. And then the ruffle, I like it, I think, but this one's definitely still too full. I reduced it to 150% fullness. Next time I try something like this, I will do 125% fullness. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, I don't like drawing attention to my hips. I've mentioned it before. So like, I just don't feel as comfortable wearing clothes when I feel like it is bringing attention to that part of my body. I do like how the bodice slopes down a bit in the front, and actually I've already changed all of my bodice patterns to slope them all down a little bit more in the front. I like that it's not a crop top, and actually with the ruffle, like, I can't, get skin to show. So if you like this whole idea, this concept, but don't like crop tops, there's an option for you. In the back, I used a ribbon instead of elastic, and I'm actually pretty comfortable with that. Like, I don't know, I just feel like the elastic isn't worth it. There is something funky going on, like right between my shoulder blades. I think it's because I curved in the top edge of the pattern so that it didn't gape at the neck, but then the way that I have it like extended out to gather, like it just kind of created this weird bubble. So definitely need to fix that on the pattern. I do like the ruffle in the back. I was concerned about it being too full with this little peplum, but actually it's even more of a peplum now, and it's even more 18th century looking, so I like all of that. Overall, I'm not sure whether to give this one a 3 or a 4. I think I really should give it a 3 stars just because even though there are factors that I like about it, between the like not caring for the ruffle and the tightness of the buttons, I do feel like I'm going to wear this one less often. So yeah, 3 stars seems fair. However, there's one more thing I want to show you. Turns out I can, in fact, tuck the entire ruffle into the skirt. And like the ruffle stays in place pretty well. So this is an option that I might try in the future if I want to make more blouse shaped things. I don't care for blouses because I don't like how loose they are. They never look good on me. So I had been planning on making shirt dresses and then just wearing skirts over top of them. However, I feel like 1, that's a waste of fabric, and 2, if I make blouses, they're probably going to be mostly light colors, and I don't really want a bunch of light colored shirt dresses. So this is something I might try instead. I don't know, we'll see. So yeah, it was a prototype. I learned a lot from it. That was the goal. Alright, so we have this green striped skirt, which I'm really excited about. Like, you don't know how excited I am about this skirt. Basically, what I did with this skirt is I used my half circle skirt pattern, but instead of cutting 4 panels, I cut 5 panels. So 2 for the front, then 3 for the back. And then in the back, I did a gather up section with 2 of the panels. And then for the gather up section, I literally just used a shoelace, like literally a brown shoelace, and then just pulled it tight. This is almost the perfect pattern. I love how much fullness the skirt has. It has a lot more fullness than a half circle skirt because it's 25% larger at the hem. I like how much extra swish it has in the back. I like how versatilely these pattern pieces could be used. So with any kind of size adjustable skirt, I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube, like going through my feed. And the thing is, there's always going to be some kind of drawback. And so it's choosing the drawback that is the best for you. For me, the only drawback with this is that it does kind of gape a little bit sometimes, like, you know, an Edwardian fan skirt without a bum pad underneath it. So that is like such a negligible downside that I'm so happy with this because I've tried a lot of different options for size adjustability and played around with a lot of theories. And for me, this one is the easiest because it's simple to put on and I don't have to jack with the adjustments every single time I do it. I've seen other ones online that they just either look too complicated to sew for daily wear stuff or they look too complicated to put on for daily wear stuff. I just know that I wouldn't actually end up making a lot of them and getting a lot of use out of it. So this is the option that I'm going to be sticking with from now on. And I have a surprise for you. I did actually make the 6th item, the herringbone skirt. This is the exact same fabric as my brown herringbone bodice, and I love it. It's so lightweight and flowing, and it's got a nice little bit of a texture to it, a little bit of a pattern, but not anything overbearing, so it's still very versatile. I didn't end up filming this one. I started filming it, but then I realized that I had like half the time I needed left to make it before we were going to be heading out of town. So I threw it together as quickly as I could, and then I ended up doing all of the finishings by hand on the trip, which was kind of nice. It's the exact same pattern as the green skirt. The only difference is that I moved the closure to the side front, and then I did a button at the top, but snaps the rest of the way down. It has the same gathered size adjustability. It has the same level of fullness. It's very nice. I'm excited. I feel like I've been trying all summer long to come up with like the perfect basic skirt pattern, and I finally did it. For update number 1, we have a small house guest who keeps escaping. Hello there, little girl. Hi, baby. What are you doing out here? So we were driving through town yesterday and we spotted a crow chasing a baby rabbit, and the baby rabbit was like squeaking. We could hear it from the truck. So Caleb pulled a U-turn and went into a parking lot, and I ran out and grabbed the baby from the crow that was trying to eat it. So she seemed like she was kind of in shock last night. She bled a little bit from her mouth, but today she seems to be completely recovered. She keeps escaping and we keep finding her in random places in the house. So we're probably... Hi, baby. Oh, there she goes. So we're probably going to release her into our backyard this afternoon. I'll find her later. So we had an actual drought, worst drought I ever remember having, and it's all of a sudden turned super rainy again. So disappointing news about my garden. We never got the fence finished, and then... Oh, hi, turkey. We never got the fence finished, and then the chickens started getting in, and then I just kind of quit caring. So they have basically been eating everything, and that's not a bad thing. With chickens, nothing really goes to waste. Looks like I got a couple decent tomatoes. All right. So I guess I'm just going to have to try again next year. Oh, wow, I got a bunch of peppers on that plant. All right. All right. Hi, turkey. Is Goose being mean? Are you going to tattletale? Hi, good girl. Hi. In other news, it's been a while since I did a chicken update, but I told you that our guinea fowl had been carried off. Well, the very morning that I posted that video, we woke up to kind of a disaster zone out here. There had been a raccoon attack. The chickens were all fine, but it brutally murdered one of our turkeys. So she is our only turkey left now. Yeah. Hi, pretty girl. It was a raccoon that got the guinea fowl and then apparently got emboldened and went after the turkey. And yeah, no, there were feathers all over the yard, and it didn't even eat her. It just killed her. So we went on a bit of a rampage getting raccoons removed from the property. We ended up taking 7 of them out of here. And yeah, it's been fine ever since, but that kind of sucked. So she's our only turkey left now, and she was kind of sad for a while. She definitely seemed depressed, but we got rid of some of our roosters who were bullying her, and she's been pretty happy lately. So, hey, pretty girl. So do you see this baby right here? She is the baby that was in my 18th century video not long ago. She's getting pretty big. Looks like they're out of food. All right. I believe she is a cream leg bar. I think, but I love her. She's the best baby I've ever had, even though she's not quite as cuddly as she used to be. She definitely prefers to be outside. So yeah, we did get rid of Demon Child and Gimpy, and we still have Goose, although he's probably gonna have to go. I'd really like the females to get a little bit of a break before all of these other young roosters start trying to mate. Yes, turkey, yes, I will pet you. Gosh. You're very dirty. What are you doing? Oh, you see that one? That is formerly Bonnie, now Clyde. And I like Clyde, but also he's kind of turning into an a-hole, so he might have to go. We haven't really decided which roosters we're going to keep, but 3 was way too many roosters last time, so we're probably only going to keep the best 1 or 2 of them. Look at them all. Okay, this baby's starting to resent captivity. I think she needs to go out. Luckily, I have a nice overgrown garden that'll be perfect. Yep, okay. There you go. Hop off.